Chapter 13. The Tree of Life. A basic concept in the political philosophy of the ancient world was the Tree of Life. The Assyrian monarchs, for example, were depicted as officiating before a garlanded pole or ritual, quote-unquote, tree, which represented the ritual centre of the earth. The pole or tree was the Tree of Life, quote, a symbol of the life-giving functions of the king, end quote. Another, quote, symbol of divine kingship, end quote, was the bull or golden calf. The king represented the manifest divinity of the cosmos and its present power and dominion. The central manifestation of divinity was thus in the state, in particular in the dominant empire, so that this divine order, as it appeared in the state and the monarch, was the tree of life to its age. May Day in Rome and elsewhere represented this same faith, and Roman women on the first day of May made offerings to Bona Dea, the good goddess, or, quote, the earth, end quote. And the name May perhaps came from majores or maiores, the older branch of the Senate, that is, the source of power. The May pole was a representation of the Tree of Life. The centre of the earth, thus, was the empire, and it was the divinity of the age, its tree of life and source of fertility. The pagan roots of socialism and humanistic law are apparent in their deliberate use of May Day to celebrate their new order, called Law Day by bar associations. May Day represents the establishment of humanistic and anti-Christian law. The Tree of Life was thus a familiar image to the ancient world. Nebuchadnezzar's dream of his future portrayed him as a tree of life hewn down. Daniel 4. The Bible first refers to the Tree of Life in Genesis 2:9 and again in Genesis 3:22 and 24. The reference is to a literal tree, but a tree having a sacramental significance and denoting the gift of eternal life in consequence of faith and obedience. When man submitted to the desire to be his own God, his own principle of ultimacy, and his own arbiter of good and evil, he was cut off from that life-giving communion. The consequence of his sin was spiritual separation from God, and the outcome of separation, the inevitable liability to death. In Proverbs 3:18, wisdom, a person of the Godhead, is called, quote, a tree of life to them that lay hold, end quote, of her. In Ezekiel 47:12, there is a reference to the Tree of Life as the principle of health and salvation for the Messianic age. Jesus Christ in Revelation 2:7 promises the Tree of Life, quote, which is in the midst of the paradise of God to him that overcometh, end quote. In Revelation 22:2, the Tree of Life is a product of God and Christ, nourished by the, quote, pure river of waters of life, end quote, 22:1, and its purpose is, quote, the healing of the nations, end quote, or peoples, 22:2, quote, blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have the right to the Tree of Life, and may enter in through the gates into the city, end quote, 22:14, that is, into the New Jerusalem, the city of God, the true order. Without entering into further theological identification of the Tree of Life, it can be said that it is, first, closely linked or identified with God. Second, as closely identified with divinity, it is thus the source of life, order, communion or society, and law. Third, it is at the heart of God's community, the garden or paradise seen in its fullness as both the garden and the city, so that without the tree there is no kingdom, only death. The biblical faith was basically accepted by pagan antiquity, but simply transposed. Heaven and earth were united into one cosmos in origin. According to a fragment of Euripides, the wise Melanippe, quote, heaven and earth were one form, then they were separated from one another. They engendered and bore all things and brought to light plants, birds, animals, and the creatures nourished by the sea water, and the race of mortals, end quote. The purpose of the state was to re-establish the necessary unity and order by making itself the bond of heaven and earth, the tree of life to its people. This state thus became the life-giving tree to its age and citizenry. However, since creation was formed by the separation and consequent hostility and interaction of heaven and earth, social order rested not only on the supremacy of the state as the principle of unity and order, but also on the ritual invocation of periodic chaos as the source of fertility. Thus, first, the state represented the bond of heaven and earth, the unification of the cosmos into its true order, and the state was thus the tree of life to its people. However, second, since the fertility of creation was a product of chaos, the state could not deny chaos. Out of the rending of the original order, the world of living things had been born. Therefore, chaos represented fertility, vigor, creativity. Accordingly, the state, as the tree of life, invoked chaos in periodic festivals such as Saturnalia, in revolutionary activity aimed at periodically overthrowing the threat of sterility through order, or as a result of order. There was thus a legitimacy of chaos, and this legitimacy was in two spheres. First, chaos was legitimate and necessary at the time of the festival when acts of incest, homosexuality, and coition with animals were often required to revitalize the state. Second, this legitimate chaos could occur outside the state in relationship to non-members of the state, so that, as social revitalization took place in the festival, personal revitalization was possible with slaves and foreigners, persons legally outside the state and in the world of chaos, that is, not under the protecting sovereignty of the messianic state. This appears very clearly, for example, in the following Hittite laws, quote, 94. If a free man cohabits with several slave girls, sisters and their mother, there shall be no punishment. If blood relations sleep with the same free woman, there shall be no punishment. If father and son sleep with the same slave girl or harlot, there shall be no punishment. 195. If, however, a man sleeps with the wife of his brother while his brother is living, it is a capital crime. If a man has a free woman in marriage and then lies also with her daughter, it is a capital crime. If a man has the daughter in marriage and then lies also with her mother or her sister, it is a capital crime. 200a. If a man does evil with a horse or a mule, there shall be no punishment. He must not appeal to the king, nor shall he become a case for the priest. If anyone sleeps with a foreign woman and also with her mother or her sister, there will be no punishment. End quote. The only unusual feature of these Hittite laws is that they specify that such relations were outside the law and legitimate acts of chaos. In virtually all cultures, the slave and foreigner had no relationships to the state, the tree of life, and hence were legitimate objects of acts of social, sexual, and material chaos. Biblical law placed all men equally under God's law because biblical law derives from the sovereign God, not from a state and its citizenry. Biblical law protects God's order, not the social order of a people and their state. Whenever and wherever law in its point of ultimate and essential origin moves from God to man, the state becomes man's tree of life. In that collective man in the form of the state is now his own principle of order. And to be the principle of order means also to be the principle of power, because order has behind it the power to maintain order, the authority to do so by right. Power is now identified with authority, and both are seen as humanistic concepts. As a result, as Bertrand Russell suggested in Power, the basic unifying force for society and for the social sciences is power. And the phenomenon of social power is the basic subject of concern for social scientists. As an African-American scholar, Dr. Kenneth B. Clark has noted, power appears in its use without talk of power. Those who speak of it, as did Stokely Carmichael on Black Power, gave, quote, a pathetic demonstration of the lack of any effective power. Verbal, emotional slogans may be seen as forms of pseudo-power which attempt to substitute for and operate as if they were real. End quote. Clarke's definition of social power is simply that power is power. Quote, the model for a social science definition of social power comes directly from physics. The definition of power as found in the spheres of physical energy and matter. And the simplest definition which I could find is the one I latched onto for my purposes, namely power defined as any form of energy or force required or available for work to bring about motion or pressure. I think that definition can be used quite directly in social science. By social power, then, we mean that energy or force, or a combination of forces, required to bring about, to sustain, or to prevent social, political, or economic change. This simplistic definition is based upon a number of assumptions that social change or events or occurrences in a society, institutional changes, changes in the relationship among people, are controllable. These relationships may be facilitated or inhibited by human beings, particularly by those human beings who have been given or who arrogate to themselves and operate with impunity in terms of the right, the privilege, or the status to make relevant decisions affecting the lives of other individuals. Obviously, those individuals with the unchallenged status to make such decisions, to implement such decisions, and to control the society in terms of their decisions and desires are individuals with high status and with power. High status and social power tend to go together. End quote. This is clearly a theological definition, even as definitions in physics have become theological. When any object is defined in terms of itself or by itself, without reference to anything else or to any norm, then that object has been made ultimate. It has become a god, beyond definition and itself a source of definition. For Clarke, power is power because power is ultimate. It is the god of his system. Where there is power, there is the ritual center of his earth and the tree of life in his system. This, of course, means total relativism. It means, as Clarke recognizes, that he cannot condemn, quote, Hitler and Nazi Germany, end quote, or we may add, white colonials or white slave owners. He therefore qualifies power with a humanistic admonition, quote, that society is most stable and secure in which the leaders use no greater degree of power or force to maintain or modify the status quo than that which is required to obtain the desired results, end quote. But by what standard does Clarke do this? What principle of ultimacy has Clarke established as a judge and god over power? Clarke appeals to clinical psychology to label pathological the expending of, quote, greater energy in behaviour or interpersonal relationships than that which is ordinarily required, end quote. But again, what is Clarke's definition of normal and abnormal power? Social power, Clarke holds, quote, can be used either to maintain a status quo or to modify it, or to change it fundamentally, end quote. The use of social power to maintain an order is conservatism, and Clarke lists as conservative groups the NAACP, the Urban League, quote, and to some extent a pre-McKissick CORE, because they are not requiring, they are not demanding that the social system, the power system, be changed fundamentally. They were not even requiring that it be modified too significantly, except from the point of view of the resistant extreme white, end quote. Clarke further holds that equality is basic to power because it, quote, is my belief that there is something about social power that apparently makes it not adaptive if there is too great a disequilibrium within a given social system, end quote. What Clarke has essentially said is, first, that since for him there is no God, all men are gods and all men should have power. This means equality. Second, the state should thus use power to achieve a society of equality, and the use of power to this end is legitimate power. Third, use of power to frustrate this goal would thus be illegitimate. But Clarke does not elevate equality as a god over power. For him, equality remains as an aspect of power in its truest democratic sense, in that power is an implicit expression of the general will of the people. Power remains basic, but power now appears as a two-faced god, a kind of Janus, both god and devil in its various aspects. both the tree of life and the tree of death. Since there is no transcendence in this system, no God beyond man and the state, ethics gives way to aesthetics as the basis of life. When man is his own God, he is beyond good and evil. The decisions of life are then no longer questions of morality, but matters of taste. Accordingly, as Reid has pointed out, quote, art should be the basis of education, end quote. As a result of all these things, life again, as in the ancient world, has become politicized. Everything is now a part of the sphere of politics and under the jurisdiction of the state, because politics is salvation, and outside the sovereign state there is no salvation for man. If there are storms and bad weather, an appropriation by the state for weather control is the answer. The modern prayer to God concerning weather is a petition to the sovereign state. In the United States in 1967, federal planning called for weather modification grants that were to reach nearly $150 million a year by 1970, with the goals of being enhanced rainfall and, quote, ways to dissipate fog, suppress hail, stop lightning, stifle tornadoes and de-energize hurricanes, end quote. Poverty, disease, earthquakes, crime, wars. Every problem of man is referred to the sovereign state for solution, because political man sees the sovereign state as his saviour and the tree of life. When the pagan state of the ancient world declared itself to be the tree of life, it thereby affirmed its belief that it had seized the power and the glory of God and now commanded history. History was therefore to be understood not in terms of God, but in terms of man, not from the perspective of eternity, but from the perspective of time. The ancient monarchs, states and empires are gone, their command of history proved illusory, and their interpretation false. Their modern successors, with their similar dreams and their hope of a one-world state as man's hope and tree of life, are doomed to the same defeat, and they give every evidence of a much shorter lifespan of ostensible truth and actual pretension than their ancient predecessors. As the psalmist declared, quote, the Lord reigneth, let the people tremble. He sitteth between the cherubims, let the earth be moved. End quote. Psalm 99:1. In the Berkeley version, quote, the Lord is king, let the nations tremble. End quote. For God, the outcome of history is a foregone conclusion. Quote, there are many devices in a man's heart, nevertheless the counsel of the Lord, that shall stand. End quote. Proverbs 19:21.